I never thought a 40-acre piece of land in northern Michigan would become the center of a war. But when Margaret Patterson showed up at my door with her clipboard and her designer boots, I knew my quiet life was about to get complicated. My name is William Everett, and I inherited this property from my grandfather 5 years ago. The land sits in a peculiar spot just outside Traverse City, bordered on 3 sides by the Pinewood Heights subdivision, a development that went up about 3 years back. My property is the 4th side, and running straight through the middle of it is Old Miller Road, a private dirt road that my family has owned since 1947. It also happens to be the only way in and out of Pinewood Heights, because the developers, in their infinite wisdom, built their little kingdom on what used to be surrounded by wetlands on the other 3 sides. The county refused to build a public access road through protected marshland, so the developer bought an easement from my grandfather to use Old Miller Road. That easement came with conditions, and it expired every 10 years with an option to renegotiate. It was a Friday in January, temperature hovering around 15 degrees, when Margaret came knocking. I had just gotten back from running my trap line on my snowmobile, still wearing my insulated overalls and boots. The machine was parked next to my workshop, cooling down and ticking in that particular way engines do after a hard run through powder. "Mr. Everett," she said when I opened the door, her voice having that particular pitch that retail workers and HOA presidents perfect over years of practice. "I'm Margaret Patterson, president of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. Do you have a moment to discuss a community concern?" I should have closed the door right then. Instead, I made the mistake of being polite. "Sure, come on in, cold out there." She stepped inside, her eyes immediately scanning my living room with barely concealed judgment. I could see her taking in the hunting trophies, the well-worn furniture, the wood stove pumping heat into the space. Everything about her body language screamed disapproval. "I'll get right to the point," she said, not bothering to sit when I gestured to the couch. "We've had numerous complaints from Pinewood Heights residents about your snowmobile use. The noise is disruptive and, frankly, it's not in keeping with the character of our community." I blinked at her. "Your community is half a mile from my house. You're telling me you can hear my snowmobile from inside your development? When you drive it down Old Miller Road, yes. At all hours, might I add. Just this morning at 6:30, residents reported hearing you roar past." I was checking my trap lines. "It's legal, it's on my property, and I've been doing it for 5 years without complaint." She pulled out a piece of paper from her leather portfolio. "Yes, well, things have changed. The Pinewood Heights HOA has voted to implement new community standards for the surrounding area. We're committed to maintaining property values and quality of life for our residents. This document outlines acceptable noise levels and recreational vehicle use." I took the paper and read it. My jaw tightened with every line. They were trying to ban snowmobiles, ATVs, and dirt bikes on any property within a mile of their development. They wanted to restrict hunting to specific hours. They even had guidelines about outdoor fires and unsightly structures. "This is insane," I said. "You can't enforce this on my land. I'm not part of your HOA." "The county has been very receptive to our proposals," Margaret said with a tight smile. "We represent over 200 families and a significant tax base. We're confident that we can work with local government to ensure compliance with reasonable community standards. Get out of my house." Her smile didn't waver. "I'll leave you with the documentation. We expect full cooperation within 30 days. After that, we'll be pursuing legal remedies." She left, and I stood there holding her ridiculous list of demands, feeling my blood pressure climb. I spent the rest of that day fuming, making calls to friends who might know something about property law. By evening, I had an appointment scheduled with Tom Richardson, a property attorney in Traverse City who my buddy Dave recommended. The weekend passed without incident, though I noticed cars slowing down on Old Miller Road as they passed my property. People were looking, pointing. On Sunday afternoon, a Pinewood Heights security patrol truck, one of those white vehicles with amber lights on top, actually stopped at the end of my driveway. The driver, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, sat there for 10 minutes just watching my house. I went outside and stared back at him until he left. Monday morning, I met with Tom Richardson. His office was downtown above a coffee shop with a view of the bay. He was about 50, gray hair, weathered face. He looked like he spent his free time fishing, which immediately made me trust him more. "Let me see what they gave you," he said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. I handed over Margaret's documents. He read through them, his expression growing darker as he went. "This is completely unenforceable," he finally said. "They have no authority over your property. You're not part of their HOA, you didn't sign any covenants, and this is straight-up harassment." That's what I thought, but she mentioned getting the county involved. "They can try, but noise ordinances in rural areas are pretty limited, especially for agricultural and traditional land use activities. Trapping is recognized under Michigan law. Snowmobiles on private property are legal. They don't have a leg to stand on." He leaned back in his chair. "But that doesn't mean they won't make your life difficult. These HOA types, especially when they get it in their heads that they're protecting their property values, they can be relentless. Have you had any other interactions with Pinewood Heights? Just normal traffic on the road?" "The easement my grandfather gave them lets residents use Old Miller Road to access their development. 25 miles per hour speed limit, daylight hours only except for residents coming home from work, no commercial vehicles. Standard stuff." Tom's eyebrows went up. "Daylight hours only." "And when does that easement expire?" "My grandfather set it up to renew every 10 years. Let me think." I pulled out my phone and checked the documents I'd photographed from my grandfather's files. "March 15th of this year, actually, about 2 months from now." Tom smiled, not a friendly smile. A lawyer's smile. "And you own the road outright. It's not a county road, completely private. My family built it in the 40s. We used to log the back section of our property. The county has it listed as a private easement road." "William," Tom said, leaning forward, "I think you might have more leverage than you realize. If they want to play games, you have options. But before we go down that road, let me send them a cease and desist letter. Sometimes that's enough to back people off." "Send it," I said. "I've got nothing to lose." The letter went out on Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Everett, this is Brenda Chen from the Grand Traverse County Planning Department. I've received a complaint from the Pinewood Heights HOA regarding noise violations and improper land use. I need to schedule a site inspection." "A complaint about what specifically?" "Operating recreational vehicles at prohibited hours, maintaining unsanitary animal processing facilities, and storing derelict vehicles on the property." I nearly laughed. "I run trap lines, which is legal. I process game in a shed that meets all state requirements, and I have 1 truck up on blocks that I'm restoring. None of that is illegal. Nevertheless, we need to do an inspection. Are you available Friday morning?" I agreed because fighting with the county wasn't going to help me. Friday morning, Brenda showed up with a clipboard of her own. She was Asian American, maybe 40, and looked tired before she even got out of her county vehicle. "I appreciate you meeting with me," she said. "Between you and me, I get at least one call a week from Pinewood Heights complaining about something. Last month it was a farmer 2 miles away spreading manure. Before that, it was the sound of frogs from the wetlands. So you know this is ridiculous. I know, but I still have to respond to formal complaints. Show me around. I gave her the tour. The shed where I processed pelts was clean, well ventilated, and completely up to code. I'd built it specifically to meet Michigan Department of Natural Resources guidelines. My snowmobile and 2 ATVs were properly registered and maintained. The truck on blocks was clearly a restoration project, sitting on my property well away from any road. We spent an hour walking my land, and by the end, Brenda was shaking her head. "There's nothing here to cite," she said. "You're running a legitimate operation. I'll file a report saying no violations were found." "Will that be the end of it?" She gave me a sympathetic look. "Probably not. Margaret Patterson is persistent. My advice: document everything. Keep records of when you use your equipment, what you're using it for, all of it. If this escalates, you'll want a paper trail." She left, and I started keeping a logbook like she suggested. Every morning when I went out on my trap line, I wrote it down. Every time I worked on my truck, I noted it. It felt paranoid, but after dealing with Margaret, paranoid seemed prudent. 2 weeks later, I got a citation in the mail. Not from the county, from the township. Apparently, Pinewood Heights had lobbied the township board to pass a new noise ordinance specifically targeting snowmobiles and ATVs before 8 a.m. The citation claimed I'd violated it 4 times in the past week. I called Tom Richardson immediately. "They're really going after you," he said after I explained. "The good news is that ordinance is probably unconstitutional as applied to private property use for legitimate purposes. The bad news is fighting it will cost you time and money." "How much are we talking?" "Could be a few thousand in legal fees if we have to go to court. Or," he paused, "or we could remind them about Old Miller Road." "I'm listening." "Your easement expires in 3 weeks. You're not legally obligated to renew it. If they're going to make your life hell, you could make theirs complicated too. No road means no access to their homes. They'd have to get the county to build a new access road through the wetlands, which would require environmental impact studies, endangered species surveys, the works. That's easily a 2-year process, maybe longer, and it would cost millions." I sat with that for a minute. "You're saying I should hold their access hostage." "I'm saying you have leverage. You could offer to renew the easement if they drop all complaints and agree to leave you alone. Put it in writing, make it binding. They get their road, you get peace." It was hardball, but Margaret had thrown the first pitch. "Draft something up. Let's see if they are willing to be reasonable." Tom sent over a proposed easement renewal. The terms were simple. 20-year renewal period, same conditions as before, but with an added clause that the HOA would not file any complaints or pursue any legal action regarding my use of my property for any lawful purpose. If they violated that clause, the easement would terminate immediately. Margaret's response came via her own lawyer 3 days later. It was vitriolic. They accused me of extortion, claimed I was holding the community hostage, and threatened to sue me for tortious interference with their property rights. They offered to renew the easement under the original terms only, with no additional conditions. I called Tom. "They're not budging." "Then neither do we. The easement expires in 1 week. After that, Old Miller Road is closed to everyone except you. They'll change their tune fast." "What if they don't?" "Then they'll have to explain to 200 families why they can't get to their houses. Trust me, William, the residents will turn on the HOA board faster than you can imagine when they realize what's happening." The week passed in a strange limbo. I continued my routine, running my trap lines, working on my truck, living my life. On the morning of March 15th, I woke up early and drove into town to buy supplies. I stopped at the hardware store and picked up 2 heavy-duty gates, the kind used for farm roads with locks. I stopped at a sign shop and ordered 2 signs. Private road, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. By noon, I had the first gate installed at the point where Old Miller Road entered my property from the direction of Pinewood Heights. It was sturdy, steel, padlocked. The sign was posted clearly. I drove the length of the road across my property and installed the second gate where the road exited toward the county highway. Then I went home and waited. The first call came at 3:47 p.m. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came at 4:02 p.m. Then 4:15. Then 4:30. By 5 p.m. my voicemail was full. I finally answered the next call. "Mr. Everett." Margaret's voice was shrill. "What do you think you're doing? You can't block Old Miller Road. The easement expired at midnight last night," I said calmly. "As of today, Old Miller Road is a private road on my private property. No public access. You can't do this. People can't get home from work." "Sure they can. They just have to drive around the long way down Highway 31 to County Road 612, then back up. It's about 40 miles instead of 2, but it's perfectly accessible." 40 miles. That's outrageous. Some of our residents work in Traverse City. You're adding an hour and a half to their commute. I guess you should have thought about that before you decided to harass me with citations and complaints. My lawyer sent you a perfectly reasonable easement renewal. You rejected it. This is the consequence. We'll sue you into oblivion. Go ahead. I'm well within my rights. "Have a nice evening, Margaret." I hung up. My hands were shaking slightly. I'd never been a confrontational person, but something about her entitled attitude lit a fire in me. This was my land, my family's land, and I was done being pushed around. The next morning, I woke to find news vans parked at the gates. Apparently, someone had called the local media. Channel 7 and 4, the Traverse City station, had a reporter standing in front of the locked gate doing a live report about the road closure crisis in Pinewood Heights. My phone rang. "Tom Richardson. Have you seen the news? Watching it now. They're spinning this as you being a vindictive neighbor. They interviewed Margaret and she's painting herself as the victim. You need to give your side of the story." "I don't want to talk to reporters." "Then they'll control the narrative. At least give me a statement I can release. Tell them about the harassment, the citations, the refusal to negotiate in good faith." I dictated a statement, and Tom sent it to the media. By noon, the story had shifted. The reporters had dug into the public records and found the citation for the noise ordinance violation, the county inspection request, all of it. A few residents from outside Pinewood Heights were interviewed, and they backed me up, talking about how the HOA had tried to push their rules on the whole area. But inside Pinewood Heights, things were getting ugly. I heard through the grapevine that residents were furious. Not at me, at the HOA board. People who worked in Traverse City were having to leave for work at 5:30 a.m. to make it on time via the long route. Parents were complaining about kids getting to school late. Emergency services had to be rerouted. The fire department issued a statement expressing concern about response times. On the third day, a group of about 30 Pinewood Heights residents showed up at my property. Not at the gate, at my house. They walked up my driveway and I met them on my porch with my phone in hand, recording everything. "Mr. Everett," said a man in his 50s, wearing a business suit. "My name is Patrick Donovan. I live on Cedar Lane in Pinewood Heights. Can we talk? Depends on what you want to talk about." "We're here to apologize. Most of us had no idea what Margaret and the HOA board were doing. We didn't know about the harassment, the citations, any of it. Margaret runs the board like her personal fiefdom. She doesn't tell the general membership anything. A woman next to him nodded. I'm Susan Riley. I have 2 kids in school. This road closure is killing us, but we understand why you did it. We want to fix this. I studied the crowd. They looked tired, frustrated, but not angry. Not at me anyway. What are you proposing? Patrick pulled out a document. We circulated a petition among the residents. We got signatures from 78% of the homeowners. We're calling for an emergency HOA meeting to remove the current board and elect new leadership. We want to accept your easement terms and end this fight. Margaret won't like that. Margaret doesn't have a choice. According to our HOA bylaws, a petition signed by more than 2/3 of homeowners can trigger a recall election. We're having the meeting tomorrow night. We'd like you to come. I thought about it. Showing up at an HOA meeting in a hostile development seemed like asking for trouble. But these people seemed genuine. I'll think about it. Send me the details. They left and I called Tom. He advised me to go, but to bring him along. If they're serious about resolving this, we can hammer out a new easement agreement right there. Get it signed. Get it recorded, done. The next evening, Tom and I drove to the Pinewood Heights Community Center. It was a nice building, all modern architecture and big windows. The parking lot was packed. Inside, every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls. The energy in the room was tense. Margaret sat at the front table with 4 other board members, all women in their 40s and 50s, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. When I walked in, the crowd went quiet. Then people started standing up, clapping. It took me a second to realize they were applauding me. Margaret's face turned purple. This meeting will come to order. Sit down, all of you. Patrick Donovan stood up. According to HOA bylaws, I'm calling for a vote to remove the current board of directors for malfeasance and failure to act in the best interests of the community. You can't do that, Margaret shouted. I'm the president, and we're the members who elected you, Patrick shot back. We're also the members who can remove you. All in favor of removing the current board, the room erupted. A sea of hands went up. I didn't count, but it was easily more than 2/3. Margaret looked stunned. This is illegal, she sputtered. You can't just remove us. A man in the back stood up. I'm Kevin Marsh. I'm an attorney and I've reviewed the bylaws. This is completely legal. The motion has passed. You're removed from the board, effective immediately. Margaret gathered her papers, her face twisted with fury. You'll regret this, all of you. She stormed out, followed by 2 of the other board members. The remaining 2 looked relieved. Patrick took charge. I'm nominating myself for interim president until we can hold proper elections. All in favor? Another sea of hands. Approved. Now, Mr. Everett, would you be willing to discuss the easement terms? Tom and I moved to the front of the room. He distributed copies of the proposed easement agreement. People read through it, asking questions. The terms were straightforward. 20-year renewal. The HOA would cease all complaints and legal actions against me. I would maintain the road surface in reasonable condition. They would contribute $2,000 annually toward road maintenance. This seems fair, said Susan Riley. More than fair, considering how we treated you. I move to accept the easement terms as written, Patrick said. Second, said Kevin Marsh. The vote was unanimous. Tom had brought the paperwork already drawn up. Patrick, as the new HOA president, signed on behalf of Pinewood Heights. I signed. Tom witnessed. It was done. The room applauded again. People came up to shake my hand, apologize personally. A few offered to buy me dinner, drinks, whatever I wanted. I appreciated it, but I was exhausted. Tom and I left after about an hour. "Congratulations," he said as we walked to our cars. "You won." "I don't feel like I won. I feel like I just survived. Same thing sometimes." I drove home, stopped at the gates, and unlocked them both. I left them open. The next morning, Old Miller Road was busy again with Pinewood Heights residents heading to work. A few people honked and waved as they passed my house. I waved back. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I was in my workshop when I heard vehicles coming down my driveway. Multiple vehicles. I walked outside to find 2 sheriff's department cruisers and an unmarked sedan. A detective got out of the sedan. A woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "William Everett?" she asked. "That's me." "I'm Detective Lisa Morrison with the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office. We need to ask you some questions about Margaret Patterson." My stomach dropped. "What about her? Can we go inside?" We sat in my living room, the same place where Margaret had stood 2 months earlier telling me how to live my life. Detective Morrison pulled out a notebook. "When was the last time you had contact with Margaret Patterson?" she asked. "At the HOA meeting, about 2 weeks ago." "The one where she got removed from the board. Why? What's going on?" "And you haven't seen or spoken to her since then?" "No, I've been avoiding Pinewood Heights altogether. I don't want any more drama." Detective Morrison exchanged looks with one of the deputies. "Mr. Everett, Margaret Patterson has been arrested. We're investigating allegations of embezzlement from the Pinewood Heights HOA. During the transition to the new board, they hired a forensic accountant to review the books. They found over $200,000 missing from HOA funds over the past 3 years. I sat back, stunned. 200,000. That's the current estimate. It could be more. The money was transferred to personal accounts used for vacations, shopping, a new car. She didn't even try to hide it very well. She just assumed no one would check." The detective leaned forward. "Here's where you come in. Margaret is claiming that you coerced her, that you blackmailed her into mismanaging HOA funds, and that the stress from your road closure caused her to have a breakdown. She's trying to blame you for her crimes." "That's insane. I never even talked to her about HOA finances." "We know. We've reviewed your phone records, emails, everything. There's no evidence of contact between you two except for that initial visit and the HOA meeting. But her lawyer is pushing this theory hard, and we need to eliminate you as a suspect completely. Can you account for your whereabouts on specific dates?" She rattled off about a dozen dates over the past 3 years. For most of them, I could provide alibis. I'd been at work when I still had my job at the lumber mill. I'd been on hunting trips with friends. I showed her photos, receipts, my logbook. By the end of an hour, Detective Morrison seemed satisfied. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said. "For what it's worth, I don't think you had anything to do with this. Margaret Patterson has a history. We pulled her background. She was removed from an HOA board in Ohio 5 years ago under similar circumstances. Apparently, she moved here and nobody checked. After they left, I sat in my living room trying to process it all. The woman who'd tried to control my life, who'd cited me for living on my own property, was a thief. A con artist who'd stolen from her own neighbors. The story hit the news that evening. Channel 7 and 4 ran a full segment on Margaret's arrest, complete with footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs. The reporter interviewed Patrick Donovan, who looked shell-shocked. "We trusted her," he said. "She was supposed to be protecting our community, our investments. Instead, she was robbing us blind." The forensic investigation took 2 months. In the end, the accountants traced over $350,000 that Margaret had embezzled. She'd hidden it through shell companies. fake vendor invoices, personal credit card payments disguised as HOA expenses. The entire time she'd been lecturing me about community standards, she'd been looting the community treasury. Her trial was scheduled for September. I got a subpoena to testify about the road closure and the circumstances around it. Tom advised me to cooperate fully. They're building a pattern of behavior, he explained. They want to show the jury that Margaret was willing to abuse her authority in every way possible. Your story demonstrates how she used the HOA as a weapon against anyone she didn't like. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on the 4th day. The prosecutor asked me to describe my interactions with Margaret, the harassment, the citations, all of it. Margaret's defense attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, suggesting I'd closed the road specifically to harm her, but the timeline didn't support that theory. The easement expiration was set by my grandfather decades ago. I'd offered reasonable renewal terms. The HOA board, under Margaret's leadership, had rejected them. It was all documented. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Margaret guilty on 14 counts of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in state prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the Pinewood Heights HOA. Patrick Donovan called me that night. "It's over. Finally." "How's the community doing?" I asked, recovering. "We've elected a permanent board, hired a professional management company, implemented checks and balances so this can never happen again. And we've been talking about a community gesture, something to make amends for how you were treated." "That's not necessary. Hear me out. We want to pave Old Miller Road. Professional job, full asphalt, proper drainage. We've gotten quotes and we can cover the cost from our reserves once Margaret's restitution payments start coming in. It would benefit you as much as us, and it feels like the right thing to do." I thought about my grandfather, about the dirt road he'd built with his own hands back in the 40s. But I also thought about how roads evolve, how communities change. "Let me think about it," I said. In the end, I agreed. The paving happened in October, after the summer heat had passed. They did a good job, too. Proper grading, solid base, smooth asphalt. The road that had been the center of so much conflict became something better, something that connected us instead of dividing us. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it gets when you've been through something like that. I still ran my trap lines every winter morning, but now I had occasional company. Patrick Donovan turned out to be an outdoorsman himself, and he'd asked if he could join me a few times. We became friends, which I never would have predicted. The Pinewood Heights HOA stopped trying to control what happened outside their development. They focused on their own community, their own issues. The new board actually consulted with surrounding property owners about any changes that might affect them. Novel concept. As for me, I learned something important. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about being stubborn or vindictive. It's about defending your right to exist on your own terms in your own space. My grandfather had built a life on this land, and I'd been willing to compromise, to be neighborly, to share access to the road. But when someone tries to take away your fundamental rights, when they use rules and regulations as weapons, sometimes the only option is to fight back with every legal tool you have. The snowmobile still sits next to my workshop every winter. I still head out before dawn to check my traps. The difference now is that I don't worry about citations or complaints. I don't worry about someone showing up with a clipboard to tell me how to live. I do my thing, the folks in Pinewood Heights do theirs, and we coexist peacefully. Margaret Patterson ended up serving 5 years before being paroled. I heard she moved to Florida after her release, far from Michigan and the community she'd betrayed. I don't think about her much anymore. She was a lesson, nothing more. A reminder that people who spend their time controlling others are usually running from their own problems, projecting their chaos onto everyone around them. The story became local legend. People in Traverse City still talk about the guy who shut down an entire development over snowmobile complaints. They usually get the details wrong, make me sound more dramatic than I really was. But that's fine. The truth is recorded in court documents and easement agreements, preserved for anyone who wants to look it up. On cold January mornings, when I fire up my snowmobile and head out across my property, I sometimes see lights coming on in Pinewood Heights houses. People getting ready for work, starting their days. They use my road to get to the county highway to get on with their lives, and I'm okay with that. It was never about denying them access. It was about respect, boundaries, and the basic principle that you don't get to tell other people how to live just because you don't like the noise. Tom Richardson still handles my legal work, though these days it's mostly simple stuff, like updating my will or reviewing contracts. He jokes that I'm his favorite client because I made him famous. The road closure case got written up in property law journals, used as an example of easement rights and renewal negotiations. Law students at the University of Michigan study it. He sent me a copy of one article, and I have it filed away somewhere. I don't look at it often. The hardware store where I bought those gates now keeps them in stock permanently. Apparently, after my situation, several other property owners in the area decided to install gates on their private roads, just in case. Can't say I blame them. Once you've seen how fast an HOA can go from zero to crazy, you want to be prepared. Brenda Chen from the County Planning Department retired last year. She sent me a card thanking me for being the most straightforward complaint response she'd ever handled. She wrote that in 20 years of dealing with property disputes, mine was the only one where the person being complained about was actually following all the rules. She said it restored her faith in the system, at least a little bit. The Township Board quietly repealed that noise ordinance about 6 months after the trial. Turned out it had been drafted by Margaret herself and pushed through with misleading information about community consensus. Once the new Pinewood Heights Board clarified that the HOA didn't actually support it, the township was happy to make it go away. I got a formal apology from the township supervisor, which was decent of him. My trapline still runs across the back 40 acres, through the woods where my grandfather used to hunt. I've been teaching Patrick's son, Daniel, how to trap this winter. Kid's only 14, but he's got good instincts, respects the land. He asked me once why I didn't just sell the property after all the trouble, move somewhere easier. I told him the same thing my grandfather told me. Easy isn't the point. The point is building something that lasts, protecting something that matters, standing up when standing up is hard. Last month, Susan Riley's daughter interviewed me for a school project about local history. She wanted to know about the Road War, as the kids apparently call it. I walked her through it, showed her the gates I'd installed, explained how easements work. At the end, she asked if I'd do it all again, knowing how much stress and trouble it caused. Every time, I told her. Because it wasn't really about the road. It was about whether someone could push me off my own land, tell me I couldn't use my own property because they didn't like it. And the answer to that is no. Always no. She wrote that down in her notebook, the same kind of notebook Margaret Patterson had carried when she first showed up at my door, but the difference was in the intent. This kid wanted to learn, to understand. Margaret had wanted to control, to dominate. Intent matters. Winter's deep now, February cold settling over northern Michigan. The kind of cold that makes your breath freeze in the air, that turns the world into something clean and sharp. I love it. This is when the land shows its true character, when only the tough and the committed stay. The tourists are long gone. The summer people have retreated to their warm states. It's just us locals, the ones who choose to be here, who know what it means to live somewhere that demands something from you. Old Miller Road sees less traffic in winter. People work from home more, avoid driving in snowstorms. But it's still there, still serving its purpose. The asphalt is holding up well, no cracks or settling. The HOA kept their word about quality work. Sometimes I'll drive its length just to check on things, make sure no one's having trouble. That's the thing about private roads on your property. They're your responsibility, but they're also your privilege. You get to decide who uses them and how, but you also have a duty to maintain them properly when you allow access. I've thought about what would have happened if I'd backed down that first day. If I'd listened to Margaret's demands, stopped using my snowmobile, let her dictate terms. I'd probably still be living here, but I'd be smaller somehow. Diminished. Every time I wanted to do something on my own land, I'd hear her voice in my head, feel that pressure to conform to someone else's vision of what my life should look like. That's what people like Margaret count on. They count on most people being uncomfortable with conflict, wanting to keep the peace, willing to compromise just to avoid trouble. And there's nothing wrong with being accommodating, with being a good neighbor. But there's a line, and when someone crosses it, when they try to take away your fundamental rights, accommodation becomes surrender. I'm grateful for Tom's advice, for the legal knowledge that helped me understand my rights and use them effectively. I'm grateful for the Pinewood Heights residents who stood up against their own HOA board when they realized what was happening. I'm grateful for Detective Morrison and the justice system that held Margaret accountable for her crimes. And I'm grateful for my grandfather, who had the foresight to structure that easement in a way that protected our family's interests. But mostly, I'm grateful I didn't back down. Because this land, this life, it's mine. I've earned it through years of work, of maintaining buildings and managing the forest and respecting the wildlife. I've earned it by being part of this community, the real community of people who live here year-round, who understand what it means to be connected to a place. The snowmobile sits outside tonight, ready for tomorrow's run. The temperature is supposed to drop below zero, perfect conditions for checking the trap line. I'll be up before dawn, like always, moving across my land in the blue twilight before sunrise. I'll watch for tracks, read the story the night animals left in the snow. I'll check my traps humanely, the way my grandfather taught me, respecting the animals even as I harvest them. And if I make some noise doing it, if my snowmobile disturbs the absolute silence of the winter morning, well, that's part of living here too. The sound of human activity on the land, of work being done, of a life being lived on its own terms. It's not neat or quiet or controlled. It's real. That's what Margaret Patterson never understood. She wanted to live in a place that looked like nature but acted like a country club. She wanted the aesthetic of rural Michigan without the reality of it. She wanted to control the world around her development, to create a bubble where everything was managed and regulated and approved by committee. But that's not how the world works, at least not out here. Out here, you accept that your neighbors might do things you don't love. They might hunt, trap, run loud machines, keep livestock. They might pile firewood in a way you consider unsightly or work on old trucks or host bonfire parties. That's rural life. You don't get to opt into the scenery and opt out of the substance. The people in Pinewood Heights understand that now. The new board gets it. They focus on what they can control, their own community standards within their development, and they let the outside world be what it is. We coexist. We even cooperate sometimes, like when we had a bad storm last year and a tree came down across Old Miller Road. Patrick and a crew from Pinewood Heights showed up with chainsaws within an hour, helped me clear it. We worked together because that's what neighbors do. I think about the next time that easement comes up for renewal, 10 years from now in 2036. I'll be in my 50s, probably still running my trap lines if my knees hold up. The HOA will be managed by different people, a new generation. I hope they've learned from what happened. I hope they remember that cooperation requires mutual respect, that access is a privilege earned through good faith on both sides. But if they haven't learned, if some future Margaret Patterson decides to start the whole cycle again, well, I still own Old Miller Road. The gates are in storage in my barn. The precedent is set. I know my rights and I'm not afraid to use them. That's the real lesson from all of this. Not that you should be aggressive or confrontational, but that you should know where your boundaries are and defend them when necessary. Peace comes from strength, from the knowledge that you can protect yourself if you need to. Without that, you're just hoping other people will be reasonable, and hope is not a strategy. The wind is picking up outside, rattling the windows. Storm coming in from the northwest. Lake effect snow. Could be a big one. I'll make sure the generator is fueled up, the pantry is stocked. If the power goes out, I'm set for weeks. That's another thing about rural life. Self-sufficiency isn't optional. You learn to prepare to handle problems yourself because help might be hours away. I've started writing some of this down, not for publication but for family. I've got a nephew, my sister's kid, who might inherit this place someday. I want him to know the history, to understand that keeping land requires vigilance. It requires standing up to people who think their rules should apply to your life. It requires patience and legal knowledge and a willingness to fight when fighting is necessary. The clock just struck 9 p.m. Time for bed. Tomorrow's an early morning and the trap line won't run itself. I'll wake at 5, make coffee, suit up in my insulated gear. I'll fire up the snowmobile, let it warm while I gather my equipment. Then I'll head out across my land, following the trails I've used for 5 years, that my grandfather used for decades before me. The sound will carry in the cold air, that distinctive buzz of a 2-stroke engine cutting through the silence. Someone in Pinewood Heights might hear it, might roll over in bed and register the noise before falling back asleep. But they won't complain, because they've learned what I learned. That living near other people means accepting that they have their own lives, their own work, their own way of doing things. And that's how it should be. Not controlled, not managed, not regulated into bland conformity. Just different people doing different things, connected by roads and respect, by the basic understanding that we all have a right to exist on our own terms. My grandfather would be proud, I think. He built something here, something that lasted beyond his life. And when it was threatened, I protected it. Not with violence or cruelty, just with law and determination and the willingness to stand firm when everything in me wanted to just give in and avoid the conflict. The lights of Pinewood Heights glow in the distance, visible through the bare winter trees. It's a nice enough development, well-designed homes with good families. They're not my enemies. They never were. Margaret Patterson was the problem, one person who used her position to pursue her own agenda, who forgot that leadership means serving others, not ruling them. She's paying for that now, literally and figuratively. The restitution payments will continue for years, garnished from whatever work she can find. Her reputation is destroyed, her name synonymous with corruption in Grand Traverse County. She wanted control so badly that she lost everything trying to maintain it. I've got no sympathy for her. She made her choices, and they hurt people. Not just me with the harassment, but the families in Pinewood Heights who trusted her with their money. Some of them had to take out loans to cover the shortfall in the HOA accounts. Elderly residents on fixed incomes had to adjust their budgets. Young families saw their home values threatened when the news broke. She caused real damage, and she deserved every day of that prison sentence. But I do hope she learned something. I hope sitting in a cell for 5 years gave her time to think about why she needed to control everyone around her, what emptiness inside her required that constant validation through dominance. I hope she came out better than she went in, though I have my doubts. The fire in the wood stove is burning low. I add another log, watch the flames catch and grow. Heat radiates into the room, that particular warmth that only wood heat provides. It's work, heating with wood. You have to cut it, split it, stack it, haul it, feed the stove. But it's satisfying work, the kind that connects you to the land and the seasons. Everything about living here is like that. Work and reward directly connected. You put in effort, you get results. You slack off, you pay for it. The land doesn't care about your excuses or your feelings. It just is, and you either adapt to it or you struggle. Margaret Patterson never understood that. She tried to make the land and the people around her adapt to her vision. She tried to impose suburban order on a rural reality. It didn't work, could never have worked, but she pushed anyway because accepting reality would have meant accepting that she wasn't in control. Control is an illusion anyway, especially out here. Nature does what it wants. The weather doesn't check with your schedule. Animals don't respect property lines. Trees fall where they fall. You can manage things, guide them, work with them, but control? No. Control is what people tell themselves they have when they're afraid of chaos. I'm comfortable with a certain level of chaos. I accept that I can't predict everything, can't prepare for every contingency. I do my best, stay flexible, and deal with problems as they arise. It's a much less stressful way to live than trying to regulate every variable. The wind is really howling now. This is going to be a significant storm. I double-check that the snowmobile is secured, that all the gates are properly latched. The windows rattle in their frames. Power might go out before morning. I make sure my phone is charged, flashlights are accessible. This is the reality of March in northern Michigan. Beautiful and harsh, sometimes simultaneously. You respect it, prepare for it, and you definitely don't complain about the sound of your neighbor's snowmobile on a morning like tomorrow will be. You're just grateful that people are still out there, still working, still living the life that this land requires. I think that's what I'll tell Patrick's son when we go out on the trap line next week. Not just how to set traps or read tracks, but what it means to be part of this place. To be someone who belongs here not because of a deed or a property line, but because you've earned your place through work and respect and the willingness to stand up for your right to be here. The gate incident, the HOA fight, all of it was about that fundamental question. Did I belong here? Did I have the right to live my life my way on my land? And the answer, affirmed through law and community support and ultimately through justice, was yes. Yes, I belonged. Yes, I had that right. And no one, not an HOA president or a township board or anyone else, could take that away from me. It's a good feeling, that certainty. It lets me sleep well at night, even with the wind screaming outside and the temperature dropping toward dangerous cold. I'm where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to do, living the way I choose to live. Tomorrow I'll wake up and do it all again. And the day after that. And the day after that. Not because anyone gives me permission, but because this is my land, my life, my choice. That's what freedom actually means, and it's worth defending when someone tries to take it away. The last thing I do before heading to bed is check the locks on the gates one more time, making sure they are secure but accessible for emergency vehicles. The road is mine, but I'm not irresponsible about it. Safety comes first, always. That's part of being a good landowner, a good member of the community. As I stand there in the cold, looking at the road that caused so much trouble and ultimately brought so much clarity, I feel grateful. Not for the conflict, but for the reminder that some things are worth fighting for. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That knowing your rights and using them isn't aggressive, it's smart. Margaret Patterson tried to make me smaller. Instead, she made me stronger. She tried to take away my freedom. Instead, she highlighted how precious it is. She tried to prove that HOAs have ultimate authority. Instead, she proved that private property rights, properly defended, can stand against any bullying organization. And in the end, justice wasn't just me keeping my road and my lifestyle. Justice was her being held accountable for the crimes she committed while pretending to be a community leader. The system worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it worked. That's about all you can ask for in this world. A fair chance to defend yourself, laws that make sense, and accountability when people abuse their power. The rest is up to you. How hard you're willing to fight, how much you're willing to endure, how clear you are about where your boundaries lie. I'm clear about mine now. Crystal clear. And anyone who tries to cross them in the future will find out exactly what I learned over these past months. That a quiet man with legitimate rights and good legal counsel can stand against any HOA, any board, any bully who thinks their position gives them power over other people's lives. The wind gusts harder, shaking the whole house. Going to be a rough night. But I'm warm, safe, secure in my home on my land with my rights intact and my conscience clear. That's worth more than any HOA's approval. That's worth fighting for every single time. I lock the door, bank the fire, and head to bed. Tomorrow's trapline is waiting, and I've got work to do.